Tonight, at dinner with friends, someone is going to suggest splitting one more bottle of wine you don't actually want. And you're going to say yes, not because you want the wine, because saying no feels like admitting something, that money is tight, that you're not keeping up with everyone else at that table. But the real reason you say yes is stranger than manners, and it has almost nothing to do with the wine. The person next to you is thinking the exact same private thought you are. So is the person across from you. Nobody at that table can actually afford this dinner without flinching. And yet, all of you are about to nod along and pretend otherwise. Why does an entire group of people agree to spend money none of them wants to spend? The answer lives in what happens in your brain in the half second before you consider saying four small words out loud. I can't afford that. Welcome back to World Street Watch, where we take the tiny money moments you barely notice and show you the machinery running underneath them. Today, it's that exact sentence, 4 words long, that somehow feels heavier to say than any bill you'll ever open. If you like watching your own decisions get quietly explained, stay close and consider subscribing, because this channel exists for stories exactly like this one. So rewind that dinner table for a second. Everyone is silent about the same fear. Nobody says the sentence first. That silence has a name. Researchers call it pluralistic ignorance, a state where a group privately disagrees with something, but each person assumes everyone else is fine with it. You think you're the only one flinching at the bill. You are almost never the only one flinching. And because nobody speaks first, the group behaves as though the expensive choice was unanimous, when really it was just unopposed. One quiet nod becomes the whole table's decision. This isn't new, and it isn't even really about money at its root. It's about status, and what spending has always signaled about a person's place inside a group. Around the turn of the 20th century, an economist named Thorstein Veblen studied something he called conspicuous consumption. The idea that people spend visibly, not for the object itself, but to broadcast that they can afford to waste money without consequence. A watch isn't just a watch. It's proof you didn't need to check the price tag before buying it. For over a century, the safest financial move at any table, dinner or otherwise, was to hide any hint of struggle and spend as though it didn't exist. Struggling quietly was the price of looking fine. That old rule barely bent for 100 years. It just kept changing costumes. A decade or so ago, the loudest version of wealth quietly went out of style, replaced by something people started calling quiet luxury. A plain sweater with no visible logo, a car with nothing branded on it, a bag nobody outside the room could actually price. That wasn't really the opposite of Veblen's idea. It was the same idea wearing a disguise. You still needed money to look like you didn't care about money. The performance simply got harder to fake because now you had to know exactly which unlabeled quiet thing cost the most. Here's what makes today different, and it's the part most people scrolling past this get wrong. The old rule was to be quietly rich, or at least to look that way. The new rule, the one spreading fast through group chats and comment sections right now, is to be loudly budgeted instead. People are standing at that same dinner table and saying the sentence out loud on purpose, sometimes even before anyone asks, not in shame. Almost like a flex. And in a moment, you'll see why saying, "I can't afford that," out loud can now make you look sharper than the person who quietly picked up the whole bill. But first, the twist underneath the twist. Why would an entire generation flip 100 years of social spending logic almost overnight? Go back to a set of experiments from the 1950s, run by a psychologist named Solomon Asch. He sat a real participant in a room with several actors and asked a simple visual question, one with an obvious correct answer, comparing the length of lines on a card. When the actors around them confidently gave the wrong answer first, a striking number of real participants changed their own correct answer just to match the group. Not because their eyes deceived them, because disagreeing out loud, alone, felt worse than being wrong quietly, together. Ash had proven something you already knew from that dinner table, without ever needing the study. Humans will override their own clear judgment to avoid standing alone in a room. The unsettling part wasn't that people lied about what they saw. It's that a portion of them, questioned afterward, genuinely doubted their own eyes once the group disagreed with them. That's how strong the pull toward the group's answer really is. It doesn't just change what you say. Under enough pressure, it can start to change what you think you know. Now, here's the strange part. Loud budgeting works precisely because it hijacks that same conformity engine, just running in reverse. The instant one person at the table says the sentence first, they're not the odd one out anymore. They become the actor whose answer everyone else was secretly hoping someone would say first. The silence breaks. And once it breaks, saying no to the extra bottle of wine stops being the awkward move and quietly becomes the confident one. This is the payoff of that open loop from a moment ago. The sentence was never really a confession of weakness. Said first, it's a small act of social leadership. And everyone left at the table quietly owes something to the person who said it. Which is also why the sentence spread so fast online, far beyond any single dinner. A post that says, "Not in my budget this month," isn't performing poverty for an audience. It's performing control. Control reads as attractive in a way that quiet overspending never did, because control suggests a plan, and a plan suggests the person isn't actually worried underneath it. The visible flinch of decades past has been replaced by a visible boundary, and a boundary, stated calmly instead of apologetically, looks like confidence wearing the costume of restraint. Watch how far this reaches once you know what to look for. It isn't just dinner tables anymore, it's the friend group splitting a bachelorette weekend, where one person says the villa is out of range before anyone books flights, and somehow becomes the planner. Everyone trusts more, not less. It's the group chat deciding on a gift for a coworker, where the person who names a number first sets the ceiling for everyone, quietly relieved not to overspend. It's even the streaming subscriptions nobody wants to admit they're still paying for, until one friend says out loud they're cutting 3 of them, and 2 other people in the chat quietly do the same within the hour. Different rooms, same mechanic. Someone breaks the silence, and the group's real preference finally gets to exist out loud. It even shows up at the family holiday table, which might be the highest stakes version of all. Someone announces they're skipping the expensive gift exchange this year and suggesting a name draw instead, bracing for pushback. More often than not, at least 2 relatives quietly admit they were hoping somebody would say it first. The same pattern plays out at the office, where an entire team keeps attending pricey, after-work happy hours nobody can really afford on principle, until one coworker starts suggesting the cheaper bar down the street, and half the group switches over without a single complaint. In every version, the cost was never really the object. It was always the silence sitting on top of it, waiting for anyone to move first. But be careful what this actually is, because it's easy to get the mechanism backwards and mistake it for virtue. Loud budgeting is not moral, and it never claimed to be. Underneath the language of empowerment, it is still a status signal. Just a cheaper one to produce than the watch or the wine ever was. The generation doing this loudest isn't necessarily poorer than the generations that hid it so carefully. They've simply found a version of the same old game, where honesty about limits is the flex instead of excesses. Veblen would probably recognize it instantly if he saw it today. Different currency, same performance, just running in the opposite direction. There's a failure mode worth naming here too, because not every loud declaration is actually healthy. There's a version of this that curdles into something else, where the sentence stops being a boundary and turns into a performance of suffering instead. You've probably met that version. It's the friend who mentions the tight budget every single time, with a small sigh attached, as if the point isn't the boundary, but the audience watching them hold it. That's not the same mechanism as the confident version at all. It's the old status game wearing frugality as its newest costume, still asking to be noticed, just from the opposite direction. The tell is simple. A real boundary gets stated once and moved past. A performance gets repeated, and it waits for a reaction. So, where does that leave you? Standing at your own version of that dinner table sometime this week. Somewhere between two costly habits, both of them expensive in ways that never show up on a receipt. One is silently overspending to avoid ever saying the awkward sentence. The other is performing frugality so loudly it becomes its own kind of showing off, a martyr's version of the same status game, dressed up as discipline instead of excess. Neither one is really about the wine or the bill or even the budget itself. Both are about who gets to speak first in a room full of people quietly agreeing to lie to each other about the same fear. The honest version sits in between those two habits, and it's smaller and quieter than either one. It's simply saying the true thing at the true moment without turning it into a confession or a performance. Not, I definitely can't afford this. Must be nice for you. Dripping with resentment, and not a broadcast built for an audience that was never actually watching that closely. Just the plain sentence said early, before the silence sets in and the whole table starts pretending together. That single sentence, said once and said plainly, tends to be the cheapest thing anyone spends all night, because here's what was always true. Long before Veblen had a name for the performance, and long before Asch ever put a stranger in a room full of actors to prove the point. The group at that table was never actually agreeing on the wine. They were agreeing to stay quiet about the same fear, at the same time, together. And the person who breaks that silence first isn't the one who ends up looking broke. They're the only one in the room who isn't performing anymore. So tonight when the bottle comes around again and you feel that familiar pull to just nod along, remember what's actually happening underneath it. It was never about the wine. It's about who speaks first. If this is the kind of thing you want more of, that quiet machinery behind ordinary money moments, subscribe to World Street Watch and we'll keep finding the next one.